Everyone, welcome back to another episode. I'm really excited today because we're talking about feeding, and that's one of my favorite things to talk about. And I have a very special guest on today, Katie Ferraro. She's a registered dietitian and a baby-led weaning expert. She has a podcast about baby-led weaning and a very active presence on social media, Baby-Led Wean Team on Instagram, and we're going to talk about baby-led weaning. And I'm really excited to talk about this because I get asked a lot about, how to start solid foods, and I love telling parents like, hey, here's this really fun new thing. And then I get bombarded with questions about like the correct ordering and how often we can change foods and all of those things, because there's so much wrapped up in eating and feeding that everybody's got advice, and you have to do this first and you have to do that first, and you can't do this, or you got to do it this way. And it's so confusing and overwhelming. And you really help to cut through all the noise and just make it so simple for families to get started. So can you tell us, Katie, just a little bit about like your background and how you got to focusing on baby-led weaning?
Sure. And thanks so much for having me. It is so exciting to talk to a pediatrician who's interested in baby-led weaning instead of just saying like, nah, it doesn't work, or nah, it's not safe, which unfortunately a lot of pediatricians do. And there is this real incredible body of research that supports a baby-led approach to starting solids. So I'm excited to talk about it because everything you said is true. Like parents get so bogged down in the details, but I kind of like to strip away a lot of the noise and just look at the science, look at the evidence, and parents walk away realizing, yeah, this is like a lot easier than it needs to be. But I understand the frustration. I'm a mom of 7. When my oldest and we started solids, I just listened to what my pediatrician said. Like, I'm a college nutrition professor too. And I taught nutrition throughout the life cycle. And I knew babies shouldn't eat until 6 months, but my pediatrician said at 4 months, like, go ahead and try rice cereal. And my daughter hated being spoon fed and she hated eating. And I felt like this abject failure, because what kind of mom can't feed her own child, but what kind of dietitian mom at that? So we struggled like terribly. Like I remember to the point, my own mom is a dietitian and I'm one of 6 kids, and my sister has 6 kids and they're all really good at having kids. And I had my first kid who couldn't eat. And remember they invited me to a play date around lunchtime, around the time my daughter Molly was like supposed to be trying to learn how to eat. And I lied and said I couldn't go, not because I couldn't, but just because I didn't want them to see me struggling to try to get my daughter to eat, because I just had these internal feelings of failure at something that's supposed to be so natural. So I totally feel it for the parents listening that are like, this is not as easy as I thought it would be. And baby-led weaning, which we tried the next time around. So at like the height of my feeding frustration with my oldest daughter, my husband and I found out I was pregnant. We were pregnant. I was definitely pregnant. And I was pregnant with 4 babies.
Oh my goodness.
Quadruplets.
Okay.
So we had been doing fertility and I knew the possibility of multiples was there, but not that I was going to have quadruplets. And I remember thinking like when I saw the 4 embryos on the ultrasound and I was like, oh my gosh, like normal people would think like, how am I going to pay for college for 4 kids? Or how do you teach them how to drive? And I was like, how am I going to teach 4 babies to eat? Because I can't even feed the 1 child I have at home right now. So when the quadruplets, they were born at 34 weeks. They ended up being fairly healthy, only in the NICU for a short period of time. But I really threw myself into looking for a different outlet. Like when we go to start solid foods with the quads, I am wholeheartedly dedicated to us having a much more positive foray into food than I had with traditional spoon feeding with my daughter. And that's when I discovered baby-led weaning and did a ton of research. I just wanted to make sure this wasn't some like fad parenting, like woo-woo flash in the pan thing. And there really is a body of evidence that supports a baby learning how to feed themselves wholesome, intact foods provided by their parents from age 6 months and on. And when we did baby-led weaning with the quadruplets, it was totally different. Those babies, we had them eat 100 different foods before the time they turned 1. And it was so much fun, like watching them learn how to eat, that I actually ended up shifting the entire focus of my nutrition career to focus specifically on baby-led weaning. And now I've been doing that exclusively for 5 years. We actually had another set of multiples in there, twins, babies Gus and Hannah, and I did my 100 First Foods approach with them. And now I've helped tens of thousands of families give their babies a safe start to solid foods with baby-led weaning.
That's amazing, because I think one of the things that you really touched on there that I really try and talk with parents about too is making it fun and exciting and not stressful and overwhelming. And you get analysis paralysis because somebody on Instagram or Facebook or the grocery store or wherever said, you got to do it this way, you got to do it that way. And then it takes the fun out of it. And then you're just watching for the bad thing to happen, that they're going to choke, that they're going to have an allergic reaction, that you did it in the wrong order and now they're a picky eater. There's just so much wrapped up in eating, when I think the best thing to have wrapped up in eating is that it's an enjoyable experience, that it brings connectedness as a family, and it's something that we look forward to every evening or morning or lunchtime, whenever you're going to do it, rather than this thing that just is waiting for you at the end of the day. Like, how are we going to get through this meal? And is it going to be torture? Is there going to be something bad that happens? And so can you, from a explain it to me like I'm 5 perspective, talk to me about what baby-led weaning actually is and what it means?
Sure. So baby-led weaning is nothing new as far as the concept of babies learning to eat modified versions of the same foods their parents ate. Like, I like to remind parents that, commercial baby food has only been available for sale since the earlier part of the 21st century.
Right.
Sorry, of the 20th century. I always get that mixed up. 1900s, right? Prior to that, like, what do you think Cave Mama did? Like, she didn't cruise down the aisle at Target and pick up pouches and puffs. Like,
Right.
Babies did learn how to eat modified versions of the same foods the rest of the family eats. So erase that from your mind that this is something new. Now, as a term, it certainly is something relatively new. And Jill Rapley, who is a PhD and the co-author of the Baby-Led Weaning, the Essential Guidebook, she's kind of considered to be the godmother or the founder of the Baby-Led Weaning philosophy. She certainly coined the term and has really led the movement. I just had her on my podcast recently, and she is, most of your parents, if they've listened, they know about Baby-Led Weaning, they've read Rapley's book. She is just the most amazing and inspirational woman who's really promoted this approach, with the notion being like, we expect babies and we let babies lead the way in breastfeeding and bottle feeding. Like, why at 6 months of age do we take control away from them
Right.
and think we need to drive the spoon, and then all of a sudden reverse course at 18 months and expect them to be able to feed themselves? Like, the notion is your baby has this inborn ability and desire to feed themselves, but I always encourage parents, the key is waiting until they're ready. Like, my own mistake with my oldest was starting solids when she's 4 months old. I don't care how amazing and smart your baby is. No 4-month-old can sit up relatively unassisted to support their core and have a safe swallow. And on top of that, from a nutritional standpoint, they don't need anything except breast milk or formula up until 6 months of age. So I encourage parents, when they're starting, for sure, to just be realistic about the expectations, which is the first few weeks are really slow. And that's cool. Like, you mentioned having fun. It should be fun. There's not a lot of eating going on, right? It can take 4, 6, even 8 weeks before babies get the hang. And that's fine, because they don't need X, Y, or Z calories or X milligrams of iron. Breast milk or formula is still meeting most of their needs early on. So I think parents who are looking like for something to calm their nerves, you can really release that anxiety by thinking like, whoa, the expectation here is give them 15 to 20 minutes in the high chair 1 to 2 times a day at 6 to 7 months. And it's baby steps, because you mentioned the overwhelm is what like paralyzes so many parents. And I teach 1 new food a day, starting at day 1 of baby-led weaning.
Perfect.
And you do it for 5, you do 5 foods a week. You do that for 4 months. Your baby, or 5 months, your baby has eaten 100 different foods before the time they even turn 1, but it's just 1 new food a day. And I know you are on board with that as well, which is so refreshing to hear as a pediatrician. Well,
I think that there's a lot of people, and we were kind of talking about this before we started rolling, that there's this there's a lot of old outdated notions with food that didn't exist 2 centuries ago, like you said. And it's so funny that you talked about cave mom or cave dad, or however you phrased it, because I have a blog post that I wrote like 3 years ago about cave family and their eating. And like, you come across a patch of wild strawberries and you eat the wild strawberries. You don't say, oh, we had squash yesterday, we got to find more squash. Well, you just eat what you got.
Exactly. And if you eat the strawberry and 5 days later the baby has a weird diaper, you're not like, oh, maybe it's an allergic reaction to the strawberry they ate 5 days ago. Like, that's not how it works.
Right. We've been being chased by a Tyrannosaurus Rex for 4 days. We're not thinking about like, what was that food 5 days ago that did it. But there's a lot of old outdated notions. And I think one of the ones that's really persisted is the idea that you have to wait a certain number of days, which from a biologic standpoint makes no sense. From a evolutionary standpoint and being able to eat the food that's available makes no sense. From an allergy immunology standpoint, it makes no sense. And then, like you said, if you're introducing a new food every day, you get to 100 foods by the time they're 1-year-old, if you're waiting 3 days to introduce a new food,
you don't get there.
No, you don't even get to a third of that because you're just doing squash over and over and over again.
And for no reason, because there's
Right.
no research to support the need to wait 3 to 5 days. And until the American Academy of Pediatrics removes that language to wait a few days, which like a few is like what you tell your kids when you don't really know, like how long till dinner? Like, I don't know, a few minutes. It's
Right.
like, I don't really know.
Right.
Like that's exactly what they're saying. And there really is no hard evidence to support that. It's just like the old allergy guidelines. They used to say wait until 1. Why? Because we didn't really know when to do it. Now we know with all this new research that early introduction of allergenic foods is what prevents food allergy. And I guarantee you, as soon as somebody does the research, we're going to be like, remember when we used to tell people to wait 3 to 5 days between foods for absolutely no reason? And here's the deal with baby-led weaning. One of the benefits is that, A, you're not only helping to raise an independent eater. And as someone with 2 sets of multiples, I am all for children who can do things for themselves, like feed themselves. But on top of that, it does help reduce picky eating. But no one's claiming that it prevents picky eating because as we know, the majority of children will experience some degree of picky eating.
Sure.
And that's going to start generally in the second year of life. But if you go in to the first birthday and you only have 10 or 15 foods under your baby's belt, which is what most babies who are traditionally spoon-fed have, you lose 10 or 15 foods to that picky eating. And that child is an incredibly challenging child to feed.
Sure.
But you do 100 foods and that baby gets to the first birthday and you lose 10 or 15 foods to picky eating, big freaking deal. You still have 85 or 90 foods left that the child can eat. And that's where the beauty of really building that diet diversity, and increasingly that's what the research is showing us, that diet diversity is key for preventing picky eating. But babies don't wake up on their first birthday knowing how to eat 100 foods if we don't use the weaning period to practice. And I think that's really the key with baby-led weaning is do 1 new food a day. And pretty soon you open your eyes and you're like, my baby can eat 100 foods.
Right. And I think the other thing for parents to remember, I think that notion of every 3 days also makes it seem very breakable when it's not. And so it introduces this concept of if you don't do it every 3 days, then something bad is going to happen, and it has to be 72 hours on the nose, or something bad is going to happen, and that just makes it seem like, well, I could really mess this up. This is like, putting together a very fancy Lego set. Like I got to get every piece exactly right, or the whole thing's going to topple down. When in reality, we know that that's not the case at all. That babies can tolerate trying different foods on different schedules, and I even go further than what you've said and say, if you want to try multiple foods on the same day, if it's Thanksgiving and you want your baby to have cranberry sauce and pumpkin pie and turkey and mashed potatoes, try all those things.
They're not going to have an allergic reaction to the likelihood of having an allergic reaction to any food is very, very, very small. And even if you have food allergy in your family, it's slightly higher, but it's still very, 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 very small. So I think it's important to educate parents about what to do in the event of an allergic reaction, but the likelihood of it actually happening or being severe is very, very small. And so education is important, but oftentimes it comes at the cost of parents think, well, gosh, look at all these things that can go wrong. Whereas I like to think of, look at all these things that can go right. Like, look at all these foods that are already in your pantry, in your freezer, in your refrigerator, that I can show you how your baby can safely eat them. Like, I want parents to focus on the foods that children can eat instead of spending all their time thinking about all the things they can't do or the things that will go wrong.
I love that approach because it's just so much more freeing. It just breaks the shackles of all of the different rules and the things that you could do wrong. And it's very much like, I don't think babies should eat, like puffs just like, puffs and yogurt bites.
It's a waste of money.
Actually, oh my gosh, yes, I have. It's so funny. I've been trying to make this video for my YouTube channel. I just not making time for it, but I have puffs, I have a yogurt bites, and I want to get a steak and do like a very nice filet mignon or something, and do how much this costs per ounce versus the fanciest steak that you can buy, because this is air. Yep, because there's 1 ounce in this thing that's bigger than a 12-ounce soda. Yep. So
those products are white flour with added sugar. Like babies don't need them. I was dying. We were at the store the other day and my husband's like, stop it. Cause he's like, you always have to go down the baby food aisle. And I'm like, I just gotta take pictures. I like the added sugars in this shelf stable yogurt. You have the Target bag. There is shelf stable yogurt at Target. And guys, I hate to break it to you, but if yogurt is yogurt with live active cultures, it's not sitting on a shelf. It's in a refrigerator. And the products out there that have added sugars for babies, it's so asinine. Like the AAP says, and you kind of cherry pick what you like from them, but like no added sugar from food or drink until child is 2. And yet all the baby foods on the shelf out there are refined white carbohydrates with added sugar, like, which is totally unnecessary. You can bypass that entire aisle of the store and save yourself a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of heartache. And it is expensive for essentially nothing. Not to mention that developmentally, there's no reason for a child to suck out of a pouch, or you eat those little tiny white carb puffs. Like a child that doesn't have their pincer grasp at 6 to 7 months can't even pick them up. So they're not an ideal first food. An ideal first food is a strip of avocado, banana, some strips of meat in soft juice that like babies can suck on and transfer the iron. Like they can eat real food. It's just kind of breaking this idea, which to be honest, the baby food companies spend a lot of money to make us
really
think
good.
We need stage 1 sugar food, stage 2 crawler. That one kills me. Like, like you need to be crawling to eat this. Baby shouldn't even be out of their high chairs to eat. Like, what are we talking about?
I totally agree. And I echo everything that you just said. This is for these things that I was showing, the go-go squeeze pouches and all those different things. I went to Target the other day with my wife on like a Target date, you know, because you do that in the pandemic. And I bought props for upcoming videos. And this bag that just has baby food in it was $90. $90. And it's just one bag that has baby foods to use as props to show you don't need puffs, you don't need squeeze pouches. There's so many different things. I mean, they are convenient. Like, to be honest with you, like these apple cinnamon ones, they taste okay. And
they occupy time. Like if you're on an airplane and you need something to do with the baby, I get it. But I'm a huge proponent of not even doing snacks for babies. Like the best way to sabotage your child's intake at meal times is to offer them snacks. And so I like to give parents permission to say, we're a no snack household. And if you want to, children don't need snacks, and babies definitely don't need snacks, because milk in between the meals that they're learning how to eat is their snacks. But back to the pouches that you showed, like I don't have a problem with pouches. It's just that something like applesauce, for example, if it's unsweetened applesauce with no added sugar and you put it on a preloaded spoon and pass it to the baby, that's fine. But also just keep in mind, like, cost per serving, that's significantly more expensive, plus the waste of the packaging that you don't need, plus the fact that you could just peel and core and poach apples and put a little cinnamon on it and they can eat it. So a lot of times it's unnecessary as the perception of convenience, but for like a day, like you really could just skip that entire stage and go right to eating solid foods.
Yes, that is, I mean, they have cornered the market, and they do a really good job of making it seem like this is the developmental milestone that you have to meet, which is that you eat your puffs and you crawl on the floor, or that they're tied together somehow. But it's just nice to talk through some of these different things that people are exposed to through marketing, through going to the supermarket and being overwhelmed with the options and seeing the little starter kit and all the different things that they do to try and convince you that if you don't feed them this way, something is wrong, they're not developing right, or we're on to the next food.
Yeah, or there's extra, like the value added foods. Like I was laughing at a baby food that had extra DHA. Well, guess what? So does fish. And fish has omega-3 fatty acids, not to mention a really unique texture experience for babies, plus a unique taste. Plus, oh, hey, you're also introducing them to one of the potentially allergenic foods, which is fish. So I would prefer to see parents feed baby soft strips of salmon as opposed to some expensive refined carb food that has some added DHA in it with the perception of it being healthy that actually costs more per serving. So I think it's educating parents that like, it's okay to say no to these things. Like you don't have to go buy all this stuff. Your baby can just eat real foods that you're eating, with some exceptions. Now we of course should talk about what you don't feed baby. Any hard, crispy, like raw or crunchy foods are not appropriate for infants. We always want to make them soft. We want to make them the size that a baby can pick up even before they have their pincer grasp. We want to make sure that we don't serve any honey, of course, because of the potential risk for botulism. We do no added sugars for as long as possible. I mean, we want babies to taste the naturally sweet flavors of fruit and dairy products and the carbohydrate foods that have sugar in them, but the added sugar is completely unnecessary. Children, to be honest, just don't have room in their nutrition budget for those processed foods with all the added sugar, and parents are surprised by, like, wait, you're telling me that this yogurt from this very well-known organic dairy farm that's a national brand that says baby on it is not okay for my baby to have? Turn it around. It has added sugar in it. Your baby can eat whole milk, full fat, regular plain yogurt, which costs less than this fancy baby yogurt, which, by the way, has added sugar that your baby shouldn't even have. Right.
I like to talk to parents just about, and at that 6 month period, they're always shocked when I tell them, like, you can just cut up the soft foods that you're eating into small bites and put it on their tray and let them try it on their own. And for some parents, I think it's a little overwhelming to not have a formula not formula, but like a method to work through. And so I know that baby-led weaning helps because it kind of gives you some guidelines within the realm of, let baby eat. So can you talk a little bit about what baby-led weaning, like if I'm a parent of a 6-month-old and I'm ready to do baby-led weaning, what does that first week look like?
Absolutely. And I think you hit on something there, is that a lot of parents have anxiety about their own eating. You didn't say it outright, but like a lot of parents are thinking like, give them food that's on my plate. Like, what if it's Flamin' Hot Cheetos and regular Dr. Pepper? And I'm exaggerating, but parents sometimes realize, oh my gosh, the food choices that I'm making now matter for the rest of my family, especially when it's your oldest. But so I do a 5-step feeding framework, and each week we introduce 5 new foods to a baby. We do a new fruit on Monday, a new vegetable on Tuesday, a new starchy food on Wednesday, a new protein food on Thursday, and then a food from the challenge category on Friday. And those include the big 8 allergenic foods plus sesame, as well as some of the trickier textures and more complex flavor profiles that babies don't always get to eat, but they can. So you do 5 new foods a week, and I like to do that allergenic food on Friday. I'll do it 2 times on Friday, 2 times on Saturday, 2 times on Sunday, with no other new foods over the weekend. You can continue to offer familiar foods from previous days, but the notion there is that you've offered the baby the allergenic food starting in week 1, 6 times over the weekend, which is a 2 to 3 day pad to observe for any potential reaction. But you go right back in week 2 to doing, all right, it's Monday, it's fruit day. I have 100 first foods list, and you pick a food from the fruit list. Okay, there's 20 fruits there. Let's do apples today. It's Monday. And I don't say you have to do apples before oranges, because there's no evidence to support that. If persimmons are in season and star fruit is not, then do persimmons that week. Here's how you make them safe. A new fruit on Monday, a new vegetable on Tuesday, and so on and so forth. And the baby's not just eating that one food, but the way I like to do it is you take a 20-minute meal time, which most babies can sit in the high chair for 20 minutes. 6 to 7 months, we like to see babies eating 1 to 2 times a day. Split that 20 minutes into 2 10-minute segments. The first 10 minutes, offer your baby the new food of the day. Let's say it's oatmeal. Okay. And you serve the baby the oatmeal for 10 minutes. And then the second 10 minutes, I swap in a plate that looks more like a traditional meal. It has 3 small portions, the new food that the baby just tried, oatmeal again, and then 2 familiar foods from a previous day. So maybe it's a small portion of lamb and then a small portion of a fruit or a vegetable. Okay. So for the second 10 minutes of the meal, the baby's saying, oh, there's the oatmeal I just tried. There's 2 familiar foods from previous days. And in that way, each day you're introducing 1 new food, but you're still cycling back in the familiar foods from the previous days. So your baby's continuing to see those foods early and often, and you're continuing to move along with 1 new food per day, 5 days per week. It's 20 foods a month. In 5 months, which is before your baby turns 1, your baby's tried 100 different foods.
I love that. And it just it emphasizes the fact that there's so many different things that babies and adults can eat. I couldn't even write a list of 100 foods right now and think of enough to.
I'll tell you guys where to get my 100 first foods.
Yes, because right now I'm like, well, how many foods can I even think of? But it's so eye-opening that they can eat a wide variety of foods, and we hear from the neighbor or the sister-in-law or whomever that all their kid eats is chicken nuggets. And
dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets at that.
Only the T-Rex ones, not the Brontosaurus ones. That hearing, wow, they can eat all those different foods. So many foods I can't even think of all the foods, or I'm gonna have to figure out how to prepare this food. How fun! Maybe I'll find some new foods that I like too. It's just so freeing to realize that there's so many different things that you can do, and I like how wide open that framework is, where it still gives you a little bit. So it's not like, well, what do we have to make today? I got to think of all these different things. It does give you some ideas and some suggestions along the way to help you. So it's not just a free for all, and you don't have to show up at the grocery store and figure out how to, make whatever.
And there are some foods we do earlier rather than later. For example, with the allergenic foods, I always suggest, if you're looking for a framework in my courses and the programs that I teach, okay, start the first 3 weeks with milk and egg and peanut. Those are the three most common pediatric food allergies. Those are super easy, widely available foods. There's very easy, safe ways to feed those foods to babies. So I do milk on the Friday of the first week, as in full fat whole milk yogurt on a preloaded spoon that you hand to the baby and the baby feeds themselves. Week 2, I'll do egg. There's no shortage of ways to make eggs safe to feed baby. Week 3, I'll do peanut. And then by that time, you think about it, that baby's tried 15 foods. The parent then has this incredible amount of confidence after just 3 weeks of watching their baby. And they might not even be eating a whole lot, but the point was they didn't choke and die because, I should mention, there's research that shows us that babies who start solid foods with a baby-led approach are at no higher risk of choking than our babies who do baby-led weaning. So if you wait till 6 months and when your child is showing the other signs of readiness to feed, your baby will not choke. Like if you are offering the food in a safe environment, you've done 15 different foods, you've done 3 of the allergenic foods. Then you see the parents really starting to have fun with it. Like, let's do sardines. Okay, let's do beets. And all of a sudden, it also can expand the palate of the older children. Because a lot of times what happens is parents will do traditional spoon feeding with their oldest, just like I did, have a terrible experience. And the second time around, they're looking for an alternative because now that first child is a picky toddler, which is fine, but we'd rather not replicate that. And so they're exploring baby-led weaning with their second or subsequent baby. And I said, it's one of the few ideas you can sell a second-time parent on, right? Like they'll buy anything the first time, but the second time they're like, I know better. But they love baby-led weaning because they're like, hold up. The baby can just eat the foods I eat. And if you do the 100 first foods approach, it oftentimes you can incorporate the toddler into the meal preparation. So starting to prepare some of these foods for the baby, they're interested in, they're touching it, they're smelling it. They're being exposed to more foods as well. And they're oftentimes more inclined to expand their palate. So now you're not only helping your baby, but you're helping your picky toddler as well. There's no shortage to benefits. You even help, your spouse or your parent. My husband loves every time we do baby-led weaning. He's like, I always lose so much weight because we never get to go out because you're like counting all their foods and we're making it at home. It's like, yeah, you're right. Like your husband might even lose weight.
Right. Or try
new foods
or something.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So, I love that. Okay. This has been eye-opening. I think that has really helped me to just kind of have a better understanding of how baby-led weaning works. Parents ask me about it and I tell them I think it's totally great and I'm all for it, and just feed the baby is kind of my mantra. Like, don't make it overcomplicated, but this really helps to provide a framework for how you get to 100 foods in the first year of life, which is
and if I can add real quick that the key is in waiting. If I know anything at this point of having helped tens of thousands of families with baby-led weaning, wait until your baby is ready. And what that means is 6 months of age or beyond, even if you have a small baby or a big baby, or your mother-in-law tells you that baby's hungry, needs to start solid foods, wait until they're 6 months of age, or a week or 2 or 3 or even 4 past that. Your baby's not going to die if they don't have their first bites of food until closer to 7 months. You want them sitting up relatively unassisted. That's the key. Anytime you've got a slumping over baby, that baby's just telling you with their body language, they're not ready to eat yet. And so the biggest mistake I see parents making is that they're very eager and excited, but it's not safe to feed a baby who's not ready to eat. And so really waiting until the baby is ready, parents are like, oh, that's what it's supposed to look like. And to you and me, a week or 2 might not be a big deal, but when you compare it to the lifespan of your child, like waiting an extra 2 weeks is like monumental with all the developmental changes that they will undergo and physiologically to get ready to eat. So if you're on the fence about it and you're not sure if your baby's ready, wait an extra week.
Sure.
Just to make sure.
I love that. That's such good advice. And just to clarify, when you say they're sitting up unassisted, you mean like in a chair, or do you mean you plop them down on the ground and they can stay?
Yeah, plop them on the ground. They can tripod without face planting. And people always say, well, then how many seconds? It's like, listen, there's no evidence-based guidelines about how many seconds, but like if it's 2, that's not enough.
Right.
I'm always like, okay, if they were on the bed and I'd like lean over to grab my purse or something, I wouldn't be freaked out that they were going to fall off. Like that's a good sign. But sitting on the floor is safer, I would say.
Yes, I think that's one thing that parents, that question that you asked, like how many seconds, is something that parents often need help with detaching from. Is like there has to be a very specific green light. Like we know that you should wait a year until you introduce honey. We know that you should do this and that, but it's not like 364 days to 365 days, something magically changes about their physiology that allows them to have cow's milk, or that allows them to have whatever, that we're just looking at trends and general guidelines in all of these different things that we do, that there's nothing absolutely special about a baby that, crosses the 11th hour mark and becomes a 1-year-old or a 6-month-old or whatever it is. And
Yep.
so I like your approach of just like, here's some guidelines of when it looks like they're ready. If you're not sure, just wait another week. And you're totally right that babies change so much in that short span of time that then they might be ready. And when parents come to me and they say they're really not taking to it, I'm just always like, well, just wait a couple weeks. Like, it's not a big
Exactly.
deal
It's
to just
slow going.
Yep.
That's what I tell them.
Yep.
The first 4, 6, or even 8 weeks. Now, if you've been doing it for 8 weeks, if you started at 6 months of age and you've been doing baby-led weaning for 8 weeks and your baby's not picking up the food, not leaning toward the food, not interested in it, that's not typical. But some parents will be like, oh, it's been 7 weeks. And I said, wait another week. Like
Yeah.
it something does click. And really, for most babies who've been doing baby-led weaning for about 8 weeks, that's when it all starts to click. And that's good because that's the time their food intake starts picking up. It might be time to start thinking about dropping that first milk feed. And now all of a sudden, your baby is moving in the trajectory, which is what weaning is intended to do, which is slowly your baby gets more nutrition from food and they get less reliant on milk.
Right.
And that the goal is by the time they're 1-year-old, we want to see babies sitting at the table with the family eating modified versions of the same foods the rest of the family does.
Right. I love it. Okay. I'm going to put everything in the show notes so that people can find you and your programs and your podcast. But tell my audience where they can find you online so that they can learn more from you and your approach and everything.
Sure. I'm on Instagram at Baby Led Wean Team, and my podcast is Baby Led Weaning Made Easy. If you guys want to sign up, I have a free online workshop called Baby Led Weaning for Beginners. It's all about how to get your baby to try 100 foods before turning 1 without you having to spoon feed purees or buy pouches. And you can sign up for that at babyledweaning.co. And that's where I give away my 100 first foods list. So everyone on that free workshop gets a copy of the 100 first foods list. And I hope you guys will explore all of the food that our babies can eat. Because as you were saying, babies can eat so many more types of foods than we oftentimes give them credit for.
Love it. Awesome. Well, all that will be in the show notes. So if you're listening right now, you can just swipe over, click the button, get right over to there so that you can join in and get that awesome information. Thank you so much. It's been so fun to talk with you for as a healthcare professional, as somebody that likes feeding babies, as a parent of many children. It's just been a pleasure.
And can I just say thank you as a pediatrician for taking interest in this topic. I think it's so important. In the unfortunate reality in the United States is that 90% of physicians have never taken a dedicated nutrition class. And so parents go to ask their doctor questions about nutrition. And sometimes instead of saying, I don't know, they'll give outdated information. Sure. And I think it's so wonderful that you're educating your audience. And I would encourage parents to do education on their own as well, because there is a credible body of research that supports baby-led weaning. And I applaud the pediatricians who are getting more involved in knowing about that, because that's where parents go to ask questions, is to the doctor.
Right. And they go online. And so if you show up where they are, then you get to have some influence over their making of choices. And if you can present that in a way that educates them, as you do, and as I try to do as well, then it makes them feel empowered and confident and like they're part of the decision-making process for their baby and their family. So,
and to have fun while you're doing it, because feeding should be fun. You got to feed that baby for the next 17 and a half years of its life. Like, you better enjoy doing it. And food, wholesome food doesn't magically appear on the table. There is some buy-in on our part. So I love to help parents set the stage for the child to have a healthy foundation with food. And oftentimes for us as parents, it means reframing our approach about food as well. So thank you again for touching on this topic. I think it's so important.
Well, it has been a pleasure. Thank you, Katie.
Bye now.